Hello, my name is Jayne Houdyshell, and this is my life in the theater. Before I open this book, I have to say the first 25 years I was in the theater, I worked in regional theaters all over the country, theaters small, medium, and large, did classic plays, modern plays, farces, tragedies, everything in between, and also worked in summer stock theaters doing musicals and light comedies, etc. Those were great years. But finally, I tired of my life on the road, and I decided I want to stay in New York and work here. Because the whole time I was doing regional theater, I had an apartment in New York, but I just used it between gigs. So finally, in about 2002, 2001, I decided to commit to staying in New York. I was doing an off-Broadway play at the Zipper Theater, and while doing that, two women from Downtown Theater came to see the show because they were looking for an actress to do a workshop of a new play that they were developing. They were Lee Silverman and Lisa Crone, and the play was called Well. We had a great meeting. They agreed to work with me for a week on a workshop, and at the end of that week, we really hit it off. And they decided to keep me on with the project. We did so many readings and workshops on this play for about a year and a half, and then the Public Theater put it on their season. We played it at the Martinson Theater at the Public to great critical acclaim. It was very exciting, and the audiences just were off the charts. And we extended the run, I think, 3 times. I received an Obie Award and other accolades and notices, as did Lisa. 2 auspicious things happened during that run. Number 1, the great Broadway producer Liz McCann came to see the show, and she was off the charts enthused about it and wanted to see it move to Broadway. Secondly, I had done summer stock in 1980 in a small theater in Illinois and worked with a young actor who was 18 years old named Joe Mantello. He remembered me, he saw the show at the Public and came backstage and reintroduced himself, and it was really wonderful to see him after all those years. More on that later. We went to Broadway with Well after the off-Broadway production. The critical response was boffo, and the producers expected the play to have this kind of box office bump as a result, and it didn't happen. And we limped along on very weak houses, half houses, for about 6 weeks, at which point the producers said, sadly, we're going to have to close. We closed on a Sunday. On the Monday, the Tony nominations came out. Lisa was nominated for Best Actress. I was nominated for Best Supporting Actress, and that was Well. It was a play that launched both of our careers. I think it would be safe to say. It was a wonderful experience to work on it all the time that I did. And it was too bad we didn't have a longer Broadway run, but it was great that we made it that far. Now, back to Joe Mantello. The second thing I did on Broadway was Joe asked me to replace Carol Kane in Wicked. At that point, Wicked had been running, I think, 4 years. I didn't know from Broadway musicals at all, and I certainly didn't know anything about the replacement process, but I said, sure, I'd be happy to. And I watched the show as many times as I could. I had, I don't know, 4 or 5 rehearsals with the stage manager in some odd room with tape on the floor by ourselves, you know, kind of walking through the scenes. And I went to costume fittings, got my wigs fitted, and then all of a sudden I found myself in a put-in with the entire company on the day of a show. And They were all on stage in their street clothes, and I was out there in wig, full makeup, and the whole Morrible drag. We just went through my scenes one by one, very quickly, and then that night I was on. And I had never experienced anything like being shot out of a cannon like that. But it went well, and I had a 9-month run as Morrible. And I was really grateful for the experience because I got a very good feeling for what it was to be in a big Broadway musical. And it was fun and arduous, and I learned a lot, and I was very grateful to Joe for putting me in the show. After that, Bye Bye Birdie. I did an off-Broadway play with the Roundabout, the Language Archive, and from that there was a workshop of Bye Bye Birdie, and when they asked me to play Mrs. Peterson in the workshop, and we had a great time working on it, and they subsequently decided to do it the following year with John Stamos and Gina Gershon, and Bill Irwin and Dee Hody. Wonderful cast of an adult ensemble and a wonderful cast of young people's ensemble. And we had a very successful 6-month run at the Henry Miller's Theater, which became the Stephen Sondheim Theater. But the new theater that is the Stephen Sondheim Theater, this was the inaugural production in that new space, and it was a real honor to work there. And we had a great deal of fun doing the show. The cast was great, the esprit de corps was great, and the audiences flocked to see John Stamos on stage. We had a successful 6-month run, and then our leads weren't able to stay on with it, so we closed. They decided not to continue it. But that was Bye Bye Birdie. So I had all of a sudden 2 big musicals on Broadway. Wow. I never saw that coming. Oh, and next, I stayed with the Roundabout Theater and was invited to join a replacement, a put-in and cast for The Importance of Being Earnest. Now, this production of The Importance of Being Earnest had originated in Canada, directed by the great Brian Bedford, and it was also starring the great Brian Bedford as Lady Bracknell. The cast was largely Canadian. They toured Canada and part of the United States, and then their last stop was in New York with the Roundabout. And they played it for a designated, limited 3-month run. At the end of the 3 months, it was such a huge hit, and the critics raved about this production with good reason. They decided to extend it by another 3 months, but several of the cast members had to leave. And so I was called in to replace Dana Ivey as Miss Prism, and Brian Murray in to play Reverend Chasuble. Now, I had done The Importance of Being Earnest 3 times regionally. I'd played Prism twice, and I'd done Bracknell once. So this put-in wasn't quite as traumatic or feel as odd as the put-in for Wicked. But we had a proper 2-week rehearsal period as well. And it was a real privilege to be part of that company. And the next play is Follies. Oh my God, I love doing this so much. I had done some of Sondheim's musicals in summer stock, and I was, of course, a huge fan, but I never dreamed that I would do a Sondheim musical on Broadway. As it turned out, this production of Follies was first produced at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. And my friend, Linda Lavin, who I had been privileged to do a play with at Lincoln Center, was playing Hattie at the Kennedy Center. But she had a prior commitment to a leading role in a play in New York following that run, and was not able to extend her run in Follies to Broadway. And so they were looking for a replacement for Linda. And my agents got a call that I couldn't believe I was hearing correctly. They called me and said, Stephen Sondheim wants to see you just to hear you sing through Broadway Baby for him. It was like, oh, sure, okay. So I was a little familiar with the song, but I learned it very quickly. I went in for what was called a meeting, but for the audition. James Moore, the music director, was there, and an accompanist, and no Stephen Sondheim. And James said, I'm so sorry, Stephen had something come up at the last minute, so it's just gonna be me with you today, if you don't mind. And I was like, and I sang through the song a couple of times, and it turns out they wanted to be sure I could do it in the original key, because they wanted to do the trio at the end of the song, and so they couldn't change a key for me. They couldn't be flexible that way. And the key was very comfortable for me, lucky for me, and I was very comfortable doing the number. And that's how I got the job. I mean, it was so painless and fast, and I kept thinking, did they make a mistake? You know, it just didn't quite feel real. Anyway, so we met for rehearsals again. The whole company came together, and we had a very nice, luxurious 3-week rehearsal period to not only put in other new people. There were some new dancers coming in, and Mary Beth Peel also came in to play Solange. She was new. But also the company wanted to brush up, and they made a few changes and tweaks for Broadway. And so I went into this Broadway production feeling very comfortable, and like I knew the company and was part of the company. And it was heaven playing this part. It was so much fun to do the number. And I didn't have a lot of responsibility in other scenes at all. I had a lot of downtime. And what I would do, well, I also had a torn meniscus, and the dressing room was way up many flights of stairs. So what I would do was just stay down on deck and listen to the show in the wings every night, because it was so blissful just to hear that score. I never got tired of it. And James Moore noticed that when he would cut through to go to the pit to conduct the show, he always noticed that I was sitting there. He said, "What are you doing down here? You don't need to be down here." And I said, well, I explained, and I said, I love listening to the score and I never get tired of it. And he said, would you like to come down to the pit sometime? And I said, absolutely. So I had the privilege. The orchestra was very cramped in the pit, but they made this little space for me, this little stool, and on a designated matinee, I went down and sat in for the second act in the orchestra pit. And I'd never felt anything like the rush of what it was to have that sound surround me and get a feeling of what it is to be a musician down in that pit. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. It was such a gift. But I loved doing Follies. And the run was a big hit. And then at the end of the run, we closed and had 3 months off. And then we went to Los Angeles and played it for 6 weeks at the Ahmanson. In the 3 months that we were on hiatus, I had surgery for my torn meniscus and got my knee fixed. Went to LA, played the show there, and while we were there, the Tony nominations came out. And Danny Burstein and Jan Maxwell and Ron Raines and myself were all nominated for Tonys. So that was my second Tony nomination. And we closed the show on a Sunday night, and the Tonys were the next day. They had cars waiting for us at the stage door for those of us who had to get back to New York fast. And they picked us up and drove us to a private airport at like midnight and took off in a private plane and flew across country that night. And so we could get to New York in time so Danny Burstein could get to the theater for rehearsal for the Tonys, because he was doing a number. And that was surreal. I mean, the whole thing was surreal. But we all got to go home and take a nap and get ready for the Tonys. And that was a lovely, lovely evening, too, and a nice way to celebrate the end of Follies for me. Okay, next. Oh, Dead Accounts. This was a sweet play by Teresa Rebeck, who was from the Midwest, as am I, and she grew up in Cincinnati. And this was about a Midwestern family in Cincinnati, and it was kind of an homage, I think, to her family and to the part of the country that she knew so well. And it was a comedy, it was a domestic comedy. And it was a fun group of people to work with. It was Norbert Leo Butz, Judy Greer, Josh Hamilton, Katie Holmes, and myself. All very sweet people, and it was directed by the great Jack O'Brien. I have to say that the absolute highlight for me, in addition to my fellow colleagues on stage, loving working with them, was having the opportunity to work with Jack O'Brien. I mean, he's a genius, and I'd always wanted to work with him, and that I had the opportunity was a huge gift. It didn't do well at the box office. It didn't do well critically. We had a short run. I think it was 2 or 3 months. But I had a nice time doing it, and I loved being at the Music Box. What a great theater that is. And then next, I did Romeo and Juliet, which is at the Richard Rodgers. Again, this was my 3rd time doing the play. Regionally, I'd played Lady Montague at one point, and then I played the nurse at one point. But I was cast as the nurse in this production, and I was really happy to have a second go at the role because it's a marvelous part, and to have a proper really long rehearsal process with it was great. And I loved the actors the whole company was marvelous, but the actors that I got to have scenes with, mostly Condola Rashad, Chuck Cooper, Rosalind Ruff, and Brent Rogers, all people whose work is admirable, beautiful. I like to think that our chemistry was good on stage, and it was a privilege to be able to do that great play one more time. Fish in the Dark. Larry David, by his own admission, I don't think I'm telling tales out of school, doesn't like the theater. He told me this, he told everybody this. His reason is, when he goes to the theater, he sits there a nervous wreck because he's always afraid someone's going to forget their lines. But anyway, he wrote a play, not knowing how to write plays because he hadn't seen many plays, but he knew he wanted to write a comedy, and he had an idea for it. He wrote a play with 18 characters. Now, I don't know anybody who's written a comedy with 18 characters since Kaufman and Hart, but Larry David said, well, sure, all these people are important. Some of the people had 4 lines, 2 lines. It was amazing. It was very funny. It was very off the wall, very wacky. One of the wacky things, at least I thought, was that I was asked to play his mother. And now I think I'm 4 years younger than Larry, but who's counting? But it was an honor. It was an honor to play Larry's mother in Fish in the Dark. And it was a great company of great comedians. I've never been in a room with so many funny people in my life. And Larry, again, not having any theater background really, just kept handing out pages, new pages every day, and rewrites, all the way through previews. And someone told him, broke the news to him, you know, after we open, you can't do that anymore, Larry. But he would occasionally slip something, even after we had been playing for several weeks. He couldn't stop himself. He kept having ideas. But it was so much fun. We laughed all the time, all throughout the rehearsal period. The audiences came and, as pilgrims to a shrine, loved Larry and loved the play so very much. I don't know when I've heard an audience have a better time in the theater. And he brought the house down every night. It was a big hit. He agreed to play it, I think, for 3 months. And at the end of the 3 months, he was done, ready to go. The play was such a commercial hit. Producers wanted to keep it going. Larry said, I will not continue, but he said, maybe my friend Jason Alexander would like it. And so they approached Jason, and in very short amount of time, Jason showed up I never experienced anything like this. He showed up on stage for his put-in. First of all, went around the entire cast, so many of us, calling us each by our names. Jayne Houdyshell, so nice to meet you. You know, Ben Shankman, oh, I'm really glad to meet you. Knew all of us, apparently. And then the stage manager said, now we'll just start and stop as you need, Jason. Just let us know anytime. We'll kind of work our way through slowly. Jason said, okay, no problem. He started the play and never stopped once, never called for line. It felt for all of us as if he'd been playing it for, I don't know, 3 months himself. And it was the smoothest, most seamless, flawless put-in. And the audience's response, his take on the role was very different than Larry's, of course, and his interpret was different. But the audience responded as enthusiastically as they had with Larry. So we finished the run another 3 months with Jason, and that was great fun and amazing. After Fish in the Dark, this play was, I don't know, in some ways very life-changing for me, The Humans. It was by Stephen Karam, brilliant playwright. And my first experience with The Humans was a workshop at New York Stage and Film, and it was beautiful at that point, but there was still some writing going on with it. Sam Gold directed that workshop, and at the end of the workshop I remember Sam saying, this play is so beautiful and perfect, and it is not the play for me to direct. He said, there's nothing I can do with it. I like to take plays and manipulate them and give them different treatments and stuff. He said, this is so just straight on realism. He said, I don't think I'm the person for it. They decided to go with Joe Mantello. It was a commission by the Roundabout Theater Company. So we went into rehearsals with Reed Birney, Cassie Beck, Sarah Steele, Lauren Klein, and Ariane Moyed and myself. It was one of the most effortless rehearsal periods I ever remember having on any play. I don't know, part of it had to do with all of us feeling like we were perfectly cast in the role. Part of it had to do with Joe's understanding of the play and what it needed, what kind of touch it needed and what it didn't need. He was very economical in his directing of us, but his understanding of how to stage it visually and all of that was just stunning. And from the first preview, we knew it was a hit. The audience's response was just magic. And I've never had this happen before or since. On opening night, after the show, Joe had us come to the dressing room and gathered us together as a cast, and he said, after this run, we're going to move immediately to Broadway. The Roundabout made that decision that was what they were going to do. They felt no reviews had come out yet, but they felt very firm about its chances of succeeding. And then the reviews were very good and the audiences came. So we had a 3-month run off Broadway, and then we moved to the Helen Hayes. And we had a very happy 6-month run there. And then we needed to leave that theater because the second stage was renovating it. So we moved to the Schoenfeld and had another happy 6 months there. So it was a good, healthy, long run that was beloved by audiences and by us, all of us who were able to do it. And we did very well at the Tonys, won Best Play. I won Best Supporting Actress. Reed Birney won Best Supporting Actor. David Zinn won a Tony, and it was an extraordinary experience from start to finish. We then subsequently did it in LA, and then we did it in London as well. It was the gift that kept on giving. Next is A Doll's House Part 2. That was another gift that kept on giving. That was a very happy, happy, happy play to do. So extraordinary. Laurie Metcalf and Chris Cooper and Condola Rashad. I got to work with Condola again in Doll's House, and myself, just the four of us, and Sam Gold directing. And Lucas Nath wrote the play. It was extraordinary. We all loved it. We had so much fun rehearsing it. We hoped that audiences might like it. And then we opened the play and they loved it. And which made it even more rich and fun for us to play it. And it was critically very well accepted. We were nominated for a lot of Tonys. Laurie won for Best Actress. I was nominated for Best Supporting. Condola was nominated for Best Supporting. And Chris Cooper was nominated for Best Actor. The entire cast was nominated. And that was really fun to go that year. And after the Tonys happened, we were slated to close, and it was because several people in the cast had to go on to other things. But it was floated, what about recasting it and keeping it running? And I said, I'll stay on. So they brought in Julie White, Stephen McKinley Henderson, and Aaron Wilhelmi. And again, a dreamy cast, beautiful actors, and they were all very unique to the parts and brought their own game in, and it was equally successful. And we had a dreamy 3-month run with those people. And I was grateful to be part of the whole thing. Which brings me to King Lear. Oh my gosh, the hardest play ever written, I'm convinced. I was grateful to be in it. I never dreamed that I would be playing the Earl of Gloucester opposite Glenda Jackson's Lear. But I remember when I was in high school, a kid growing up in Topeka, Kansas, sitting on my parents' living room floor in my home and watching on PBS Peter Brook's Marat Sot, and seeing a young actress play Charlotte Corday and watching her thinking, I've never seen anybody like this in my life. She was like a creature, and extraordinary and unique and so compelling, and gave this mesmerizing, powerful performance. And I thought, I want to work with her. I mean, she was just like amazing. And that was a young Glenda Jackson. And I remember seeing her in films after that and following her career, and then hearing that she was a politician, for God's sake, and just an amazing person. And I couldn't even wrap my head around the fact that I would be acting with her, never mind playing a male role against her male role. Not against, I mean, the Earl of Gloucester and Lear are best friends, and have this very extraordinary relationship on stage. I have to say, the time I spent with her was, it was like this surreal kind of out-of-body, heightened experience for me as an actor. I just felt lifted up by her and really inspired, and I relished being out there with her every night. And as we were closing, she said, you know, I'm not sentimental about this sort of thing. She said, but it just so happens that our scene is my favorite scene in the play. She said that to me right before it was time to go on. So I was very moved and grateful that I had a chance to work with her. Oh, that's Glenda. Okay, after King Lear closed, I was asked to do Eulalie McKechnie Shin, because, you know, the way you do after you do King Lear. And then the pandemic happened, and nobody knew what was going to happen, because the whole world shut down. Nobody knew what the state of Broadway was going to be whenever it happened to reopen. So it was in question for a little while whether or not Music Man was a done deal. Finally, we got the word that it was indeed on, and the sets were built and the costumes were being made, and there were some choreographic workshops happening, and could I go in for costume fittings, and it started to become very real. And then we started rehearsals. And it was the most extraordinary way to come back to Broadway for all of us. To say that the rehearsal room was filled with joy and gratitude every day is an understatement. And add to that mix that, you know, half of the cast is under age 18. It just made it that much more joyful and fun and funny and light-hearted. And we had the best leaders I can imagine at the helm of the show in Hugh Jackman and Sutton Foster. They are both buoyant, brilliant, inspiring, very talented, hard-working people. And they set the bar very high for all of us and made it fun to reach for that bar. Every single day of rehearsal, every single performance we did on Broadway. And we ran the show for one perfect, glorious, happy year. I am very, very grateful. I will forever be grateful that my coming back from the pandemic was through the Music Man, because I felt like the gift that that show gave audiences was just what we all needed. Which brings me to Uncle Vanya, a play that I have never done. I remember doing scenes in acting school when I was 19 years old. But I'm coming back to Chekhov after all these years, and at the beautiful Vivian Beaumont Theater at Lincoln Center, with a director who I really admire, Lila Neugebauer. I had the privilege of doing a small film with Lila called Causeway. I can't wait to work with her again. I had the privilege of acting with Heidi Schreck in a play called The Language Archive at the Roundabout, and have admired her work as a writer as well, and I can't wait to work with her as the adapter and translator of this production of Uncle Vanya. And there is an extraordinary cast of actors, all of whom I've never worked with before, which is one of my favorite things to do, is to come into a cast not knowing anyone, because it's just like everything's fresh, everything's new, everything's possible. And here we are getting to do a great play.